Let's get stuck in. That massive Optus blackout, by the way, was just a disgrace. We'll talk to our panel about that. The Prime Minister, as we know, is in the Cook Islands for the Pacific Forum. He seems to be handing out money and visas now as well. And Israel's ground invasion of Gaza continues. You've got more casualties on both sides, and I'll keep an eye on that protest that might unfold tonight in Caulfield. Joining me to get the latest on all of the news around the country, One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and former Speaker of the House Bronwyn Bishop. Bronwyn and James, welcome. Can we start with this High Court ruling? And Bronwyn, this is against locking people up in immigration detention indefinitely. It's been labelled by the High Court disturbing because it could lead to lots of stateless detainees being released. The ruling overturns the precedent. You were in government when this was introduced. Look, the High Court can say what it likes, but you'd have to say that program that the former government put in place to house refugees offshore worked because it stopped the boats.
Well, it did. And Steve, I might say, I think what people don't understand about the High Court is that it is able to overrule itself. Unlike any other court which is bound by rulings already made, it can overrule itself, and it does, which is why it's so unpredictable. Now, what this means is that not only does it make it more difficult to protect our borders, but also our people, because the message will go around to the people smugglers. They monitor what happens in this country. And, of course, with these people being released, a paedophile who raped a 10-year-old boy being released into the community. And the strange thing about it is the speed with which that decision was given, and we're yet to see what the split was in the court and what the reasoning of the court was. So there are many things to be answered, but one thing's for sure: the government is going to have to react, and quickly, with a way to restore faith in our policies and to protect our people.
James, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the Albanese government is probably going to celebrate the fact that this has happened. I mean, Labor has never liked offshore detention ever, have they?
No, they sure haven't. And if you remember rightly, back in 2018, Labor teamed up with Kerryn Phelps, the independent from New South Wales, and helped overturn or change the immigration and detention legislation back in those days so that these people could be brought to Australia. These were the very worst of the worst. These are people that tried to come to this country under a refugee program. They were told at the time, don't come here, you'll never come to Australia. We rehoused so many of those people in other countries, but these are the worst of the worst. These are the people that those other countries didn't want to take, and yet, knowing full well Kerryn Phelps and the Labor Party helped overturn legislation to bring them here to Australia on medical terms, and that's a very loose term, medical terms. Look, Labor's got a big job ahead of them. They should on Monday have legislation ready to go. I don't care whether they've got to sit all week next week, both in the lower house and the Senate, to get something passed that will close this loophole, overturn the decision of the High Court and protect Australians. But that's what needs to happen next week.
Well, while we're talking about our borders and protecting our border security, I mean, the Prime Minister, as we know, is in the Cook Islands. We saw pictures of him floating around on a boat in the opener there. But he's announced that Australia's going to offer climate asylum to all residents of the Pacific island of Tuvalu. He's also announced his government will not be rushed into announcing its emissions targets for 2035. So this worries me. Bronwyn, does this not set an incredible situation up here for Australia? It's a precedent that we're going to have to deal with. If you say to Tuvalu, oh, look, we think your island's going to sink, so you can all come and become Australians, what happens to the rest of the Pacific Islands? What happens to other countries who say, well, hang on, what about us?
Well, it will be a precedent, and it has been set. But there is merit in having Pacific Island peoples on a visa able to come more easily to Australia. We need their people to come here and to work, particularly in agricultural areas, in aged care. They're very welcome in this country. But once again, here's the Prime Minister handing away yet more millions of dollars, not discussed, making this announcement on this new form of visa without it ever having been discussed. He seems just to be out of control. He's certainly out of the country far too much. And if the Parliament needs to be recalled, if he dares to put his foot back in the country for long enough, he can be present. But if he's not here present, then the Parliament should sit and deal with the question of that we've just been discussing, of how to deal with these worst of the worst, as you described them. It's just no way to run a country. It is just. I've said again and again that when 20 years I sat in the Parliament, in the House of Reps with that man, and nobody ever said he was leadership material, and he's just proving it. He's simply elbow the trot.
James, this issue of Tuvalu, I mean, let's start with, is it actually sinking and is it going to disappear? And how does the government intend to choose who of the Tuvalu people actually get to come here? I think they've talked about something like 1,800 out of a population of 11,000, I think the figures are. How are they going to work that out?
Well, it's another promise that's been made on, well, it's probably worked out on the back of a coaster on his way over there, to be quite honest with you, Steve. Look, you're right to say that it's about 2.5% of the population every year will be given that gold ticket to Australia if they want. But you're right also to question whether or not Tuvalu is actually sinking. A study by the University in Auckland actually revealed over the last 4 decades, the island size, the island's mass has actually increased by 180 acres. So this is just, these Pacific Island nations have been playing Australia. They know that we've been giving them more and more money because they play on this whole fact that, climate change. Well, now we're just playing into it again. Albanese needs to get serious. Here in Queensland, we've got a vacancy rate in housing under 1% across our state. I don't know where these people are going to go, especially if we're going to continue with our refugee program from right across the rest of the world as well. Nuts. This is crazy.
Bronwyn, a 10% jump in 12 months in the number of public servants in Canberra. Again, to the cost of living crisis and the fact that we've got such pressure on the budget, why are we employing so many more public servants? What the hell are they doing?
Well, clearly a lot of us is going to have a looking after your mates component. But let's be honest. The government spending is out of control. They are spending money, let alone the off-budget money, but on-budget money they're spending. And at the same time, they're trying to kid people and say they care about the cost of living and reducing it. Now, the fact of the matter is they could use money that is, instead of employing additional public servants, they could use that money to reduce the cost of the fuel excise, because fuel is one of those things that's in the basket that is measured, that counts towards inflation. And as Paul Murray's been saying night after night, why don't they reduce the fuel excise like previous governments did, like Morrison did and like John Howard did? It's a very real thing that can be done for people. But the fact is that the government just spends money again and again without it being properly evaluated. And then comes out and says to the Reserve Bank, don't put the rates up, which of course, in the mind of the new governor, says, well, I better put them up, otherwise I'm under the thumb of the government. There is absolutely out of kilter monetary and fiscal policy. And this government has no idea about what it's doing to try and relieve the pressures on people.
James, what gets me about a 10% increase in public servants is the government continues to spend money, and I know One Nation has spoken about this, on consultants. I mean, all of those consultants that get employed to do government reports into policies that the government might want to introduce. So the public servants that we're all paying and increasing the number of them, they're not actually doing anything.
And the other big problem, Steve, is none of them are held accountable. So many of these bureaucrats that are employed in Canberra are giving false advice. And when it's been found out to be false advice, like, for example, the Snowy Hydro scheme, when we were told that it was going to cost $2 billion to implement that, and now it's blown out to new figures, which they're predicting to be around $20 billion, nobody is accountable. So not only have we got the expense of the bureaucrats, but we've got the expense of their mistakes going on top of it. So it's a basket case. I don't know why we're using them. Get rid of half of them. They're useless.
James, thanks for your time. Good to see you. Now, before we go, Bronwyn, I think you've got something to say.
Yes, indeed. When I was discussing the terrible situation in the Middle East on Sky News last night and the awful anti-Semitism that we're witnessing, I made some comments about the ABC. If I offended anyone, I'm sorry. I will remain committed to calling out atrocities, and my support for the people of Israel is unwavering.